Well, one of the big news stories this week has been that the BBC have been accused of manipulating news stories and not giving a fair and accurate uh, image of what's been happening. And there have been a couple of examples of this. So the two that the Conservative Party have particularly picked up on have been, first of all, that there was, I think it was a Panorama programme where they took two different things that Donald Trump had said and sort of spliced them together to make it sound like he was inciting the Capitol Hill riots. I think they made it sound like he had said, get down to the Capitol Hill, I will come with you. We're going to sort of rise up violently against the establishment kind of thing. Whereas actually he talked about going to peacefully demonstrate and standing with people on that. I mean, my immediate reaction when I heard that one was, why would you think that you needed to make it sound like Donald Trump was saying something? Why would you need to go to those lengths of sort of manipulating things together? Isn't there enough that he has obviously said and done for us to be able to challenge and question and disagree with his behaviour and to give a case for not supporting him? So, that just seems to be unnecessary anyway. Story number two is how the BBC said to have handled what has been happening in Gaza. So they've been accused of bias against Israel, and if you remember right back, there was a refusal, a reluctance to refer to Hamas as terrorists. So that's example number two. I personally picked up on an example this week. So we would have people in our church family who are Nigerians, and we've got a relationship with Nigerians who are here in other churches and church planting. We also have contact and relationship with people from Nigeria who are ministering in Nigeria. So there seemed to be just a step up this week because we've been aware of what has been happening. It's not hit the mainline news, the mainstream news, and it's not even really been big in terms of the Christian evangelical news cycle. It's been there, there's been reports, but it's not really been the sort of the front page stuff. And in our own church, we would probably, in terms of when we are praying for the wider world and praying for those that are suffering persecution, Nigeria would be one of the places we would mention, not least because of the connections that we have. But it's not been sort of up there as the headline. And then again with Donald Trump's intervention this week, it seems to have taken off in the main news cycle. It grabbed the attention of people in our church. We had people saying, not sure that we agree with his suggestions about what to do, going in with all guns blazing is actually going to be that helpful for Nigeria or for Nigerian Christians. However, he is taking notice. He's saying that something needs to be done, and that seemed to push it up the agenda. We noticed even a great deal of weightiness to it in our own church, and people saying, what should we be doing? But one of the things I picked up again with our friends at the BBC was that they did an article, a report on Donald Trump's proposals to send in American troops. And in the article, they say something to the effect of observers, however, in Nigeria are not reporting any evidence of a genocide that targets Christians. And then, in terms of who those observers are, what we are given is one quoted source as an advisor to the Nigerian government. Now, out of interest, the Nigerian government, for all kinds of reasons, it's not really in their best interest, to acknowledge the full horrors of a genocide, particularly a genocide against Christians going on. But the BBC seem to be really playing down the idea of genocide and ethnic cleansing and persecution of Christians, which is in stark contrast to what we are hearing from the on-the-ground eyewitnesses, and seem to be relying on really the kind of the propaganda that is coming from the Nigerian government. So there are 3 examples, and it just struck me that there's a couple of things to pick up on here. First of all, our own responsibility in terms of telling the truth. And what that means is that we always have to remember that the ends do not justify the means. That in terms of the stories that seem to target Donald Trump, there might be a temptation to say, well, he deserves what's coming to him, because whilst that bit of the story might not have been true, it kind of fits with a picture and narrative that seems to have the ring of truth about it. But actually, because of that, there was no need to do that. And it was the wrong thing to do. It is so important then that we ensure that we do not treat the truth as a commodity that is negotiable. Whoever benefits from or loses from that truth. Secondly, it raises all those questions about how do we know, doesn't it? How do we know what is true? Well, there seems to be this sort of smoke and mirrors, where there seems to be manipulation, where we've got all the deep fake kind of stuff. And I'm going to say 2 things about that. Here's the first one. There's a responsibility on us to check carefully, and that means both standing back to get the big picture, but also getting into the detail and checking that out. And that's something that no one can do on their own in isolation. That really is the responsibility of all of us. Actually, check it. Don't just take something at face value in what you say. Don't just share memes and video clips and get worked up about them. There's been a lot of that, hasn't there? A lot of, particularly around the flags and the rallies and the far right stuff. There's been a lot of, we'll just share something, we'll get really angry about it without checking out what is happening. Here's an example. I was drawn to something that I saw today. It was a little clip from the Free Speech Union, and it was sort of headline on social media. You couldn't make it up. Now, my experience is that whenever people say you couldn't make it up, actually, you could make it up. That shows a real level of a lack of confidence in the ability of the human imagination, doesn't it, to say you couldn't make it up. Look at the things people do make up. So, in that particular case, the thing that apparently we couldn't make up was that a human rights case in terms of freedom of expression in New Zealand, that somebody had attempted to go in and report on it, had been prevented, that they weren't allowed in to listen, to observe, to hear, and then to report. And so it was meant to be about free speech, but free speech was being suppressed. But when you actually watch the video clip, the person who was doing that tells us that they're stood outside the court. There's going to be this particular court case, and they were in New Zealand to do some speaking and teaching, and they thought, it'd be interesting to go to this court case and write about it. So they'd asked if they could have access to the court records, and they'd been told that they couldn't have particular things, including they couldn't sit in the press gallery because they were not accredited New Zealand journalists. But they could go to the public gallery. And then they say that, but they wouldn't be allowed to take notes. So, first of all, just that little bit of investigating says, well, actually, that's not what you claimed at the start. Because this is not about you being censored or prevented. This is not about something happening in secret behind closed doors. You could go in. You could observe, you could listen. The case is going to be reported on. All the relevant stuff that would be shared will be shared, but there's a process and a way of doing that. And then a little bit of further checking raises further questions, because even the idea that if you sit in a public gallery that you aren't able to take notes, well, that seems a little odd to me. And generally speaking, in jurisdictions around the world, you can take notes. And a little bit of checking tells me that that's possible in New Zealand as well, unless the judge makes a decision, in the same way that the family courts will do things in private, in closed session, that kind of thing. So there are times when a judge can say there are certain restrictions here for reasons like, for example, we have got to be careful about protecting identities, and we don't know what you are bound by if you are not part of the agreement of being an accredited journalist. We don't know what we can hold you to, but also the possibility that information could be passed to witnesses and people that are going to be called on to shape that. Having said that, what I don't know is whether that was actually the case of this case, or whether the person has been told it, or they have just assumed that would be the case when they're in the public gallery. In other words, when they say you couldn't make it up, actually someone has made something up, because either a judge has made up, not in the fictional sense, but in the sense of developing, in terms of creating a particular legal position, or somebody has made up a version of how that New Zealand court is meant to run, which isn't actually the case. So is fictional, whether that's what's been told to this activist, or what they've just assumed themselves, the power of their own imagination. So yes, you could make it up. And again, there's an example of doing due diligence before we just react to things, before we just pass things on. And that's true when we're dealing with public issues. It's true when you deal with things in church as well. When you hear something, pick up on something, when someone says something to you, before you emotionally react, and before you start acting and saying something needs to be done, make sure that you have done that due diligence to check everything out. And here's my final point. Even with all of that due diligence, sometimes we just won't know what the truth is. Now, I believe in a God who brings everything to light in his time, and that's where we can trust him. And also, what I would say is this. I believe that even when we are waiting for the full revelation of truth, for all of that truth to come into the light, we can trust in truth that is unassailable, that is guaranteed, that's rock solid. And that's the truth of God's word and the truth of God himself, Jesus. But God himself is truth. So we can always rely on him. That's where our confidence in a world that is uncertain, where truth is uncertain, lies.